Hello, everyone. Today we're here to talk about trauma-responsive pedagogy and how trauma affects students, teachers, and schools as a whole. Trauma-responsive pedagogy is especially important because trauma is becoming a bigger problem that schools are faced with. More and more students all the time are coming from experiences of trauma, and that means teachers need to know how to respond to trauma. Trauma doesn't just happen to walk through your door wearing a sign saying, "Hey, I've had a horrible experience and now I'm going to be a challenging student." That's not what happens. But it could look like depression or anxiety or PTSD if a student has problems concentrating or seems overly tired or is, suffering from physical symptoms like headaches or dizziness or nausea. Any of those things could be signs of trauma. Also, students can exhibit like other maladaptive behaviors, like being overly aggressive or defiant. Trauma responsive teaching is a form of culturally responsive teaching. And while in typical culturally responsive education, we think about race and ethnicity, gender, trauma is also a culture. So, trauma responsive pedagogy is also culturally responsive pedagogy. There are many similarities between both practices of teaching. You have to affirm students' identities, you have to make relevant your lessons to those experiences. You have to focus primarily on building relationships. But there's a lot of theory around culturally responsive education and around trauma responsive pedagogy. But I wanted to develop a curriculum that actually put tools into practice. So we can start with creating a safe environment for students, set aside class time to have students help you develop the norms and behaviors that are expected in the classroom that support all students. Additionally, teachers need to check their own personal bias. Whether you're aware of it or not, you might want to take some time to reflect and think about how you've been socially influenced and how those influences may negatively impact your students. So don't diagnose students when they walk in your room. Don't stigmatize them. Don't use information from previous years on behavior reports or hearsay from other teachers. All of these things could negatively impact students. So you have to set clear expectations. And the best way to do that is to model those expectations. I mean, teachers can maintain rigor and challenge students, but show the students explicitly like how to tackle problems, how to self-regulate emotions. Teachers need to use caring behavior. Also, adjust your lessons so that they garner and support the idea of community. Students who have experienced trauma value safety above all else. If they don't feel safe, they're not going to be engaged and they're not going to participate in your classroom. They may even avoid your classroom. So, a lot of typical differentiated instruction that comes from like special education, like chunking assignments, providing breaks, all of these things are also trauma responsive. So, you're not expected to do something entirely new. You're just supposed to continue using best practices based on all previous research and understanding around teaching. A trauma responsive classroom could take students from being disengaged to being re engaged, being a part of a community, sharing ideas. Trauma responsive pedagogy is really about building relationships between students and teachers, between students and their peers, and between students and families to the entire school community. It is essential that in order to respond to these students, that they feel safe, protected, and cared for. If we don't do that, we're not being responsive, and these students are not going to be successful.